Fallen dark angels are the premier forlorn knight, ruled by betrayal in the aftermath of a broken oath, clad in a mix of ancient armor and scavenged gear, constantly being hunted by their own brothers. Today, I'm going to be making my own Fallen Angels character that's going to be leading the 5-man unit from my previous video. My name is Tanzi, let's get to bashing. The foundation of this model is Lord Terminos from the Stormcast Eternals Age of Sigmar range. This is the one from the Skaven Tide Edition starter box. I personally think this looks way better than the one that they decided to release afterwards. The only problem with it is that he is quite stiff. He's got a very, centralized pose, symmetrical looking straight ahead. So this is going to be more about selecting the right parts and making sure I swap them out correctly. First, I'm going to start by building up the model using the push fit parts and a little bit of tack. Right off the bat, I can tell that the axe is going to have to change. It is a great size for the model. However, it's not the right style for what I'm trying to get here. Since he's a fallen angel, he has to have a hooded head to go along with the rest of the fallen angel models that I'm putting together. But in order to get a hooded head on there, I've got this strange sun armor design kind of thing at the back of his plate. I'm gonna have to cut that right off in order to get a head to fit, and I'm just gonna trim that down and clean it up a little bit with my knife. I haven't decided on a head yet. If I find that the one that I do want to use is still getting in the way of where that little lip is, I can always cut that down further later. I know I want a Dark Angel shoulder pad for his left pauldron. This is really to drive home this idea that he's still clinging to his roots even as a fallen lord. I am probably going to use my knife to wear this down a little bit, but I'll do that in a later step. The other shoulder, the right one, I think it already looks great with the fur covering the shoulder pad. Maybe he lost that shoulder pad a long time ago. Maybe he's just using some random piece of ceramite or another material, and he's covering up with the fur so that nobody can really see that part of him. I mentioned in my previous video, but the backpack is really important in figuring out how chaos tainted this particular model is going to look as a fallen angel. So I started dipping into some of my Horus Heresy bits. I did find that these gave him more of like a displaced knight sort of aesthetic over just being warp tainted. I ended up finding an old Chaos Space Marine backpack that didn't have as much of the spikes or the skulls or anything like that. And I think it's going to match really well with the rest of the unit while not being exact copies of the backpack that they have. While I've been doing this, I've been testing out different heads to see what fits as I make decisions like what kind of backpack he's going to have or what kind of shoulder pads he's going to have. It gives me an opportunity to assess whether I've got the right head in place. Now it's time to move on to the weapon for this model. I know that as a fallen angel, I want to give him a sword. The problem is finding a sword that's big enough to replace this giant axe that he's holding. Fortunately, I found the Terminator sword arm from the Dark Angels upgrade sprue. This is nearly the perfect length to fit in place of this axe. It should be a pretty easy swap, probably just at the handle. I don't even think I'm gonna have to pin this thing. Near the bottom of the weapon, since the model is kind of elevated and this goes past his feet, I've got a little bit of breathing room. So if I need it to go a little further down or if it's a little higher up, the base should be able to accommodate that difference. So let's go ahead and cut the axe right at the bottom of the handle there and cut the sword off at the top of the hand, and just clean it up a little bit before using some plastic glue and fitting that into place. I'm just gonna take some time to make sure that it's nice and aligned and let that set. I'm gonna continue to assemble the rest of the body now using some glue. Where I do have these push fit pegs, I tend to cut them off because I find that they will leave gaps. Oftentimes, whenever I've tried to use a push fit model, if I'm not able to really push those pieces together, I end up with these giant spaces that I just can't close. So I find it's often safer to just cut those pegs right off and glue the model together instead. There are some areas that I haven't made my final decisions on. I will continue to use some tack in those areas. In order to get the backpack to fit on this model, I'm gonna have to trim down a little bit of the fur cape. Unfortunately, I did lose some of the footage here, but you can see it is a pretty easy step to just glue this on with some plastic glue. Before gluing the shoulder pad on, I do want to cut it up a little bit, make it look damaged with my knife. I think this represents a moment that he finally broke away from his origins as a Dark Angel and maybe desecrated that shoulder pad himself. Or it's possible that he came into contact with another more recent Dark Angel, maybe a loyalist, and through battle, he ended up defeating that Dark Angel and taking that shoulder pad as a reward. Maybe he decided to wear it and leave the damage on there. I think it's also important to note that fallen angels don't have the same type of maintenance for their armor that our Loyalist chapter would have. So it's possible that he would like to repair some aspects of his armor, but he's just not able to do that. I have finally decided on a head. It is another part from the Stormcast Eternal range. Specifically, it's this kind of like Skeletor looking head wearing the hood. I got lucky, someone in my community just gave me a whole bunch of bits, and I was surprised to see this one in there because it's such a great part. I like to avoid poses that are too symmetrical. I find that they don't always make your work look natural. So in order to avoid having him be like his original pose and being way too symmetrical, I'm just gonna turn the head a little bit to the side. I think this minor change will have a big difference in the final composition of the model. So with the head glued in place, I'll glue that shoulder pad on and I can start working on the base of the model. I'm gonna be using a 2-part epoxy sculpt for this. So I'm gonna take the 2 parts, mix them together and spread this out evenly over the base. Now, unlike my previous videos during this step, I'm actually gonna use a little bit more of this epoxy sculpt in order to start building up some layers. On the original model, there is kind of this brick wall terrain piece, kind of like a tactical brick wall that he's standing on, and that elevates him high enough that his oversized weapon doesn't like interfere or push too far into the base. So this elevation is kind of required, but I don't want to use that original brick wall piece. I'd rather use something that I've made myself. So I'm going to use a couple of additional layers of epoxy sculpt and try to match that height on the base. And now I get to pop on some of those resin basing pieces that I get from Epic Basing. These are coming from the Demon Stone as well as the Chaos Crystals pieces. I'm gonna take some of the larger pieces and place them on the sides of this kind of pedestal that he's gonna be standing on. And I have them fanning out a bit. I think this is really important because the bottom of the model has this like robe. I want to make sure that it doesn't really interfere with that. So having these pieces fan out is going to give this nice kind of display composition without the bottom of the model having any collisions with parts of the base that I'm putting together now. I've picked out a flat piece of Demon Stone topper that I'm going to place on top of the elevated putty that I've placed on the base. This is what he's going to be standing on. I want to make sure that it's flat and large enough that both of his feet can fit, but his weapon can still go straight down further onto the base. Now that I've got these major pieces in place, I can use some more of these resin pieces in order to just kind of cover up a lot of the epoxy by putting them at different angles, kind of intersecting with the pieces I already have. So I'm trying to cover some gaps. Some I won't be able to, no matter what. There will be some of the putty showing, but this is going to give it that more natural look, having these pieces arranged at these various angles. I can also toss a couple skulls on there. I'm gonna put a little Space Marine helmet to cover up one of the gaps on the back. I'll probably do this in a Dark Angels color when it comes to painting. Now, an important step here is smoothing out some of the clay, some of the putty that might have been displaced by the process of fitting all of these resin pieces down. So I'm gonna take my clay sculpting tool, I'm gonna dip it in a bit of water, and I'm just gonna spend some time running it over some of the areas that I want to appear a bit smoother than they are now. This is looking great. The model appears like he can fit properly into his little chaos cradle that I've made for him on his base. To get rid of the rest of the rough edges and areas on the base, I'm going to be going with some Mordant Earth from Games Workshop. This is a pretty old bottle. I've since moved on to using AK or Vallejo basing texture, but I really want to get this bottle finished before it runs out on me. So I'm going to do the same thing as I did in my other Fallen video, where I'm just going to take a big brush. I'm going to apply it in a pretty messy fashion all over the areas that are putty. If this gets on some of the resin basing pieces or the skull, that's okay. The dried micro-fractured texture is going to look really nice tying those pieces together, even if it gets, if it overlaps or gets on some of these other areas. Before gluing this model to the base, I am going to take a moment to paint him first. And before we take a look at the painted model, I want to mention again that I'll be sharing a dedicated painting tutorial for my Fallen projects in the next couple of weeks. If you don't want to miss it, make sure to subscribe to my channel. And if you wouldn't mind, give this video a like. Now let's see how this model turned out in the end. I've been wanting to add fallen models to my collection for years. My goal is one day to have a comprehensive and heavily kitbashed army of them. That is to say, I've got more coming in the future. I appreciate you watching my process of bringing this model to life, and I can't wait to show you more soon. For now, I hope you take care. Bye.